of causal forces which violate properties of causal forces. So they're causal forces which are powered by mental states and human behaviors. So examples would be karma, bewitchment, vow, magic, the force. The way that we operationalize this is through two tests. One is a causal explanations test, where we essentially describe an event to an individual and give them multiple explanations for that event, some natural explanations, some supernatural explanations, and ask them to endorse or reject those explanations for the event. One of the other ways is through efficacy judgments. So we explain a person performing a behavior that relies on supernatural causality and asks if it'll work or not. So if a person is praying for God to make their husband healthy again, will it work or not? It's on a simple Likert scale. And finally, there are also ritual behavior concepts. So these are concepts which violate properties of behaviors. Behaviors have to be completed in a very specific way or they will not work. So, for example, baptisms, bar mitzvahs, ancestor offerings, sacrifices, blessings, etc. So the way we operationalize these are, again, through efficacy judgments. Will these work if they are performed in this way? But then additionally, we will describe a prototypical ritual. So this is how the ritual is done and always works when it's performed this way. And then we provide them with various scenarios in which it was performed slightly differently. So if certain mistakes were made, and will it still work? So not only does this give us information about how they conceptualize rituals, but also helps us break down the different parts of the ritual. Is it about the words? Is it about the physical actions that they're performing? Is it about the person who's performing the ritual? Is it about what the person is thinking about when they're performing the ritual, etc.? How important are all of those components to actually causing this ritual to work? Now, when looking at the developmental trajectory of these concepts, religious concepts begin in early childhood, but they're relatively undifferentiated from these natural everyday concepts. And through the course of development, they begin to differentiate and gain those properties that violate their categories. So, for example, supernatural agents, in terms of knowledge, prior to 5 years old, children don't really understand that people can have false beliefs. So the limitations of knowledge are not part of children's animate concepts at all, for supernatural or natural agents. Their God is just as likely as their mom to think that they're going to know everything, right? But after 5 years old, children begin to understand that knowledge and perceptions are limited. However, they learn also around this time that this limitation doesn't apply to certain supernatural agents. So after they begin to understand that their mom can actually have incorrect knowledge, they're also gaining this understanding that God is never going to have incorrect knowledge if they're in a Judeo-Christian sense. When thinking about these agent properties, again, around 5 years old, children attribute the same properties to natural agents and supernatural agents. They're all about the same, having regular natural agent properties. But by adulthood, people ascribe less natural agent properties to the supernatural agents, and then the way they describe the natural agents stays relatively the same. When thinking about supernatural causality concepts, supernatural and natural explanations for events are not mutually exclusive. So a person, for example, can understand an illness as being caused by a virus and caused by a curse from a witch. So they're not one or the other. It's usually they can both happen to cause the illness. And what we found is that prior to adolescence, children are just as likely to ascribe supernatural explanations for events as they are natural explanations. But into adolescence, the supernatural explanations begin to decrease while the natural explanations stay the same. But then around adulthood, the supernatural explanations begin to decrease again, and the levels are actually very similar to they were in early childhood. And then finally, when looking at the efficacy judgments of supernatural causality judgments, 4-year-olds are more likely than 6-year-olds to claim that wishing and wanting will actually cause something to happen. So if you wish or want something really hard, it'll happen. But by 6 6-year-olds, wishing is still more likely to want something to happen, but not wanting anymore. So it's something about this wishing that will still cause something to happen. But wanting, the simple, the wanting doesn't cause it to happen. When looking at ritual behavior understanding, just looking at the efficacy judgments, so around 6-year-olds, children claim that both everyday and ritual behaviors have to be done a certain way or they won't work. So for example, imagine a 6-year-old taking a bath or their bedtime ritual, right? They have to be done a certain way or the child will throw a fit, right? All behaviors, supernatural, natural, have to be done a specific way or that's really, really bad. But by 10 years old, only ritual behaviors have to be done a certain way or they won't work. So, for example, screwing in a light bulb, we don't have to do 3 half-quarter motions in order to get that light bulb to work, right? We can do 1 full quarter or 2 full quarter rotations and it'll still work. So one sort of outcome can be done in multiple ways. But for rituals, that's not true. That outcome can only work if it's done in this one particular way. And it's only by 10 years old that they begin to differentiate them. Well, these are all the changes that are happening in early childhood, but how do they change? Well, one of the mechanisms is social cognition. So the development of religious concepts is strongly related to the development of children's social cognition. Social cognitive abilities act as a constraint on the development of religious concepts. So children are unable to understand how ghosts are different than people until they have the requisite social cognitive abilities to understand them. So for example, in supernatural agent concepts, this ability to differentiate the knowledge of natural and supernatural agents only happens after they have the ability to understand false beliefs. Younger children think that mental forces, such as thinking or wanting, can influence the physical world, but not older children around 6 years old. And in terms of ritual behaviors, after children gain the false belief understanding, children are more forgiving of mistakes made during the ritual behaviors as long as the person really wanted it to. So it's not just that the ages correspond to one another. In this research, it's actually directly correlating these social cognitive shifts along with the shifts in the development of these religious concepts. So social cognition and the development of social cognition is one of the mechanisms that allows these ritual concepts to develop. Another one is testimony. So it's essentially, which is the common explanation in the literature, which is just the explicit instructions children receive. So how did children begin to understand that God knows everything? Because they're directly told so by their parents and priests and pastors and religious figures, etc. But direct instruction isn't the only way that children learn. And this is where my research questions come into play. So what I want to, my research line is looking at how children implicitly learn religious concepts. So social cognition is a constraint for how children develop these religious concepts. It allows them to begin to differentiate supernatural concepts from natural concepts. Well, then what's actually causing that differentiation in addition